Hi, I'm going to introduce you to my work with nervous system informed trauma sensitive yoga, focusing today on polyvagal theory and how it contributes to my work. I also describe this in my recent book, Trauma Healing in the Yoga Zone, which is available for sale. So thank you for being here. I'll just start by saying that I became interested in yoga and its effect on mental health about 50 years ago when I came home from college in a major depression, which I had never experienced before or since. And thankfully, I found yoga at that time, and it helped me tremendously. And it left me wondering, what was it about yoga that was so beneficial? So I've been studying it for a while, and I made two real breakthroughs in this century. First, studying trauma-sensitive yoga with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, which gave me permission to bring it into my work as a psychotherapist, as well as a yoga therapist. And the second one was the discovery of polyvagal theory developed by Stephen Porges. So I'm going to begin by having you ground yourself. Start to regulate your autonomic nervous system if it's not regulated already. So you can start by noticing the points of contact between the back of your body and the chair or couch or whatever you're sitting on. Bringing your awareness inward. And you can look around the room if you'd like, letting your eyes go where they want to go. This is another regulating exercise. Giving your eyes some freedom. And now you can focus on the flow of your breath without trying to change it. Just watch it as it flows in and flows out. For another breath or two. And you've just engaged your polyvagal system in order to become more present. And I'll be explaining that. I'll explain polyvagal theory for a while, and then we'll shift into applying it to yoga and offering you some yogic interventions to show that. So I'm going to start with a story of two sisters, which is a metaphor for our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, which is composed of two branches: the sympathetic branch, which gives us energy and focus, and the parasympathetic branch, which offers us healing and regeneration. So these sisters were quite different, but they both enjoyed playing with each other. The older one used to love to run through the woods, not knowing where she was going, for the pure adventure of it and the exhilaration. And the younger sister liked to sit on her bed and read, and sometimes look out the windows at the clouds going by. But when they were together, they were terrific because they balanced each other. The rambunctious sister was grounded by her other sister, and the introspective sister was energized and excited about life when she was with her older sister. So it was a very beneficial relationship. So I'm going to screen share now and try, and I hope I can easily find the diagram that describes this. Hang on a minute. You can do some breathing if you'd like while we're waiting. There we go. I'm going to center it if I can. There we go. So this is a diagram called the window of tolerance, which was developed by the psychiatrist Daniel Siegel at UCLA back in the 1990s. And it describes the healthy functioning of the autonomic nervous system. In the blue box, you can see this dotted darker blue line, which describes the rising of dominance of the sympathetic nervous system. And then as it falls, the parasympathetic nervous system takes over. And there's a continual oscillation between the two of them. So there are correlations in our physiology. As we inhale, the autonomic nervous system reaches its highest point in our body, its most active point. And then as we exhale, at the bottom of the exhale, the parasympathetic tone is the greatest. So in the course of one breath, we're experiencing the entire range of our autonomic nervous system, and that is oh so healthy for the body. So you may see the analogy now of the rambunctious sister representing the sympathetic branch and the meditative sister representing the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. Now, when the two of them are separated and they're alone, they don't do as well. The rambunctious sister, sometimes in her joy, she runs through the woods, doesn't notice what time it is, doesn't notice she's getting tired, so she might end up in the middle of the woods at dusk, not knowing where she is. And at that point, she may start to become dysregulated, which means that all of a sudden, it's described by this jagged red line. She becomes frightened and loses, she can't think so clearly. All she can do is run or try to fight some hidden enemy, which is not visible at all. And eventually, after a period of time, that's exhausting. So her energy may crash, and she may end up in a depressed state with her energy falling below the window of tolerance. Again, unable to think clearly and plan, starting to feel cold, losing energy, not knowing what to do or where she is. So these are the dysregulated extremes. And, the same thing can happen to the contemplative sister who's starting down here. She may crash and not be able to regain her feelings of peace and ease. And there's a third sister who was ill a lot. She's younger and she had to be in the hospital. She was surrounded by medical people. She didn't know what was happening. The medical people, some of them were very kind, but a lot of them were just focused on numbers and medical tests and didn't pay too much attention to her. And that was so painful for her that she is in danger now of remaining in this low energy, dysregulated state. And that is so remaining in this state is a danger for some kind of serious depression. And remaining in this state is a danger for some anxiety, panic disorder, even mania. So there are psychiatric diagnoses which start to manifest in the nervous system, which is outside of the window of tolerance as a habitual pattern. And so that, unfortunately, it can be turned around with the Eastern meditative movement disciplines, and particularly in my studies, the discipline of yoga. That's the one that I'm familiar with. And as I began to compare the difference between a somatic approach to healing and yoga, I found tremendous correspondences. They seem to be too much connected to be accidental. It seemed to me that over the centuries, the yogis who developed this discipline must have been very aware of the functioning of the autonomic nervous system and how to regain regulation. So I'm going to return now to the main screen. There I am. And in the meantime, if you're aware of questions, you can write them down and you'll have an opportunity to have them answered. If you include your email address, I could even answer them directly. That would be my pleasure. So how does this work? Dr. Porges described two different branches of this nerve, the vagus nerve, which is one of the 12 pairs of cranial nerves, which all originate and control the functioning of muscles and movement and other functions in the head and the neck. The vagus nerve is the only one of the cranial nerves which descends below the neck and also regulates functions of our major organs. So there's two branches, as I mentioned, the ventral vagus, which means the front vagus, which originates in a different spot in the primitive brain. And it controls these factors of movement and muscle tension, function above the diaphragm. And it connects with the major ways that we express ourselves and the ways that we can self-regulate our nervous system. So the cranial nerves, including the vagus nerve, regulates the movement of the eyes, the relaxation of the facial muscles, the relaxation of the tongue and the jaw, the acuity of hearing, the movement of the head when in conversation with someone, the movement of the eyes, the sound of the voice, the heartbeat. These are all, in a way, socially mediated functions. In other words, when you relate to someone who is regulated, you become more regulated. And when someone relates to you on a subliminal level, they have an idea of whether you're regulated or not and whether they feel safe with you or not. That's a big word in polyvagal theory, because the whole purpose of the functioning of the autonomic nervous system is survival. And we have instinctual survival patterns built in that have guided human beings for thousands of years. And so they are a vehicle for communicating regulation and receiving regulation. And yoga addresses these key functions and key connections of these ventral vagus, which I'll be explaining. Now, there's another branch of the vagus nerve, the dorsal vagus, which is responsible for physiological processes below the diaphragm, particularly digestion. So that part of the vagus nerve is related to the sympathetic nervous system. So I'm going to speak now about the hierarchy of responses of our autonomic nervous system. So we start out, we can start out being socially engaged, feeling connected to ourselves, the environment, other people. And then let's say a threat comes our way. In order to protect ourselves, our sympathetic nervous system kicks in, and we have a response to either fight or run away. We can feel it in the tension in the muscles of our arms and our legs. So if we can fight or run away, then we're safe again, and our nervous system can resume its normal pattern. But if we're not able to fight or run away, if we're in some very difficult, threatening situation, or if, for example, if we're children and we just don't have any options for independent action, then the dorsal vagus starts to become activated. That's part of the parasympathetic nervous system. But instead of calming us and providing energy for rejuvenation, what it starts to do is it starts to shut down the activity of our physiology below the diaphragm in particular, although there are connections above the diaphragm also. So what that means is that our digestive processes will come to a halt. We might start to feel cold. We can't think so clearly because there's not as much blood flowing to the brain. We may feel disconnected from our body or from the environment. It's a form, it's called dissociation in psychiatric terms. So that's the function of the dorsal vagus. And there is a self-preservation aspect of that also, in that as we shut down the organs, our body uses less energy, so we're conserving energy, and we're not able to move as fluidly, maybe not at all. So we're not as visible to other people. Now, this was very important in the animal world, to become invisible to predators, or even in an extreme case, to play dead, to go into a different dorsal vagal state where all the muscles are limp. There's no movement and there's no sign of life in the body. In humans, that seems to manifest through fainting rather than through a real collapse of the muscles, or a obvious collapse of the muscles. So that's a bit about polyvagal theory, about the nerves and the organs involved, about the hierarchy of reactions, and about the results, and how they relate to psychiatric diagnoses as well as other physical maladies. There's a relationship there. So I'm going to start now talking about yoga correlatives and lead you through some yoga moves. I'd like to focus now on introducing specific exercises from the yoga tradition that you can use in the session with the client. And generally speaking, when a client is talking about disturbing material, they will have some kind of activation of their autonomic nervous system. It may either go over the window of tolerance, above or below the window of tolerance, and you can have yogic interventions ready that address whatever the dysregulation is going on. So you need some skill in evaluating where the client's nervous system is at, and they can help you with that if you ask them questions. I also have an assessment form available in the book that I wrote to help you with that. So all of these interventions, which I'm going to describe, have specific benefits on the autonomic nervous system. And all you need to know is which one to use at which time. And for those of you who aren't certified yoga teachers or yoga therapists, I've created very simple instructions plus actual scripts for you to read to your clients to become familiar with the practices. Of course, highly recommend that you do the practices yourself over and over again so that you know them from the inside out. And the scripts are included in my writing. So I want to go over a basic class or a basic protocol that you can use with individual clients. I would suggest starting with some kind of physical warm-up with your clients, just in general, to help them to regulate their nervous system and start their therapy from a more centered place. And so that involves tensing and relaxing different muscles in the body and rotating different joints. And that's all spelled out in my writing. We aren't going to go into it now. And then I recommend doing some eye movements with the client if they're open to it. Each client is different and you can assess each one differently. But the eye movements are very beneficial, not only for toning and exercising the cranial nerves and muscles, which connect the brain to the eyes. There's 6 cranial nerves, but also to help to relax the muscles in the neck, which are directly related to the position of the eyes. And by doing specific eye movements, you can align the vertebrae in the neck so that the brain gets the maximum amount of blood. And that will help a person to shift their autonomic state from a dysregulated state to a more regulated one. And this work is compatible with yoga, and it comes from the work of Stanley Rosenberg, who's a body worker in Europe, who studied extensively with Stephen Porges. He has an excellent book out on that topic, Accessing the Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve. And you can read about this technique there, as well as in my book. So then we would move on to potential yoga poses to help your client, particularly if you notice that the client is becoming dysregulated in the session. You can gently interrupt their story or their process for their own benefit and say, would you mind taking a deeper breath, or would you mind twisting a little bit to the right? I think it would help you to tell your story better, to feel more centered right now. So I have specific guidelines about which pose to choose and how to administer it. So I'd like to describe that to you and take you through a few poses right now, connecting their value to the effect on the autonomic nervous system using polyvagal theory as a guide. So I've identified 4 dimensions of a yoga pose to be aware of when you're selecting the best pose. And the first dimension is simply your intention after analyzing what your client needs in the moment to regulate their nervous system. And you may need some special skills to do that. And then the most important factor in choosing a pose is the shape of the pose. Because backward bending poses, for example, require some conscious focus and muscular strength. The pose has to be held in a certain position, often going against the gravitational pull. So that requires some energy, and that raises sympathetic activity just a little bit. And then the forward bending poses are more a release into gravity, a release of any muscle tension. That would be the goal of any unnecessary muscle tension. And so the parasympathetic nervous system would be strengthened. Its tone would be increased with forward bending poses which don't require any effort. And there are two other factors. One of them is the pace that the pose is taught in, because a faster pace would increase sympathetic activity, and a slower pace would help to increase parasympathetic tone. And then there's the variable of effort, which is just the amount of effort that a client needs or is in the habit of using to get into a certain pose. Because if the effort is strong and direct, then that will raise sympathetic tone, even if it's a forward bending pose. So it depends how the pose is done. So I'd like to lead you through a few poses now so you can feel the effects on your autonomic nervous system and have your own experience. So I'd first like to lead you through a backward bending pose, which would be most appropriate for the client who is perhaps dissociating, is having a low sympathetic tone so that they are very sleepy. There's a whole list of criteria that points to the need to increase parasympathetic tone. So I'd like to teach a seated cobra pose. And by the way, I'm using seated poses to fit most easily into the traditional therapy session, whatever kind of therapy it is, for people who are wearing their street clothes or their business clothes in the session. So for the cobra pose, you can sit up straight. Bring your hands onto your lap or your knees, and arching the spine. I'm going to do it for a moment and then just be with you. You can feel the shoulder blades coming closer together toward the center of the back. Notice the chin rising an inch or two, the chin and the head. Holding the pose now, watching the breath, contacting your inner experience if you can, noticing the quality of your thoughts also if you're able to. Everyone has a different capacity to tune into their inner world, which Dr. Porges calls interoception, which is very valuable in being able to start to regulate your own autonomic nervous system. So take 2 more breaths on your own in the pose. And then let your breath return to normal, coming out of the pose. If you'd like, if you can take a moment to look around the room, letting your eyes go where they want to go, which is another regulating exercise. In my case, it's from the somatic experiencing tradition. So letting that pose go. Now we'll do a forward bending pose, which would be beneficial for someone whose sympathetic activity is too high, they're anxious, they can't sit still. Of course, if someone is in an extreme state, they can't immediately get into a more relaxed pose. That jitteriness would continue. So it's actually beneficial to step them down, step their nervous system arousal down taking small steps, like, for example, maybe teaching the pose at a faster pace in the beginning with the intention of slowly bringing the pace down to eventually help them to be in a more regulated place. So to start, the forward bending pose, which will relax the muscles. You can have someone sit straight again with their hands on the lap or the knees. Take a breath. On your next exhale, you can slowly bring the torso toward the thighs and then stop halfway down. Take a breath. If you have uncontrolled high blood pressure, heart disease, head or neck injuries, you might want to stay right there. Otherwise, you can continue to bring the torso down as close to the legs as you'd like. And finally, if you'd like, you can let the head hang. And take 2 breaths on your own if you'd like. I'm making these instructions more like options to include the trauma-sensitive part of this model, which gives the client the authority to control their own movement. So on your next inhalation, you can bring the torso, head, and spine back in alignment if they're not, and very slowly come back up to a seated position. And take a breath. Again, you can look around the room. Research has shown that it's beneficial to take a pause between the poses to produce more relaxation than you would if you just continued right through without stopping. So there's a couple of more options that we're going to use. Now I'll give you examples. There's a side stretching pose, which creates more space in the rib cage, allowing a person to take a deeper inhalation, which can either create more parasympathetic tone, or it can just allow for more balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic, depending on where the client is at. So we can do a half moon pose to demonstrate the side stretch. So again, I'm not going to do it, but you can follow my instructions. You can sit up straight, raise your left arm straight up in the air. Inhale. As you exhale, you can tilt your torso to the right and arc your left arm over the torso, feeling a stretch in your left side, and taking 2 breaths, noticing if you can breathe more deeply in this pose. And if you do, what effect it may have on your muscle tension and on the quality of your thoughts. And you can let that go now, bringing the arm down, straightening the torso. And for the sake of balance, we'll do the same pose on the other side. So you can raise your right arm straight up in the air. On the inhale and the exhale, you can start to bend your torso toward the right, toward the left rather, arcing the right arm overhead, taking a few breaths. Again, noticing any changes, feeling the stretch on that right side of your body. And as you exhale, you can release the pose, straightening the body, lowering the arm, looking around the room. Another pose which will influence your autonomic nervous system state is a spinal twist. So we're going to do the half spinal twist. I think I'll do this one with you initially, and then you can stay in the pose and experience it. There's different ways to get into it. But sit now, you can sit straight with your legs together, feet on the floor. If they don't reach the floor, you could get a pillow or something and put them underneath your feet. Put it underneath your feet. So we're going to inhale. And as we exhale, we slowly twist toward the left. Twist sequentially from the waist through the rib cage, chest, neck, and head, and finally the eyes, so that you're looking toward the wall behind you. Taking your right hand and clasping the outside of the left thigh and holding on to the couch or chair, whatever you're sitting on, with your other arm in whatever way you can to stabilize yourself. And now notice the breath. Taking 3 breaths on your own. Noticing the twist in your spine, the connection between the back of your body and the chair, your feet and the floor. Every connection is important to help you with your interoception. On your next inhale, if you'd like, you can twist around a little bit farther. And on your exhale, you can release the pose, bring the torso back to center, releasing the arms and legs. You can shake them out, look around for a moment. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. So you can sit up straight, inhale. As you exhale, twist to the right, sequentially, waist, ribs, chest, head, neck, head, eyes, and breathe. Grasping the outside of your right thigh with your left hand, holding on wherever you can with your right hand for stability, and hold the pose. Focus on the breath. Noticing what parts of your body fill and expand as you inhale, what parts contract as you exhale. Take 2 more breaths. Coming back to center on the next exhale, taking a breath, looking around. As you focus on the body sensations and the breath, you're sending messages to your primitive brain, to the brainstem, which is where the autonomic nervous system originates, where the vagus nerve originates. You're sending a message that you'd like it to either increase parasympathetic tone or increase sympathetic tone. It's a powerful message sent to a part of the body that's difficult to influence, because these survival physiological processes in the body are subconscious in most people. We can't control the speed of our heart or the tension of our muscles, the excretion of hormones from our glands. All of this happens below our consciousness. And remember that in addition to shape, there are the variables of pace and effort that can change the effect on the autonomic nervous system. So we're going to move on to the breathing practices now, which are even more powerful regulators. For the breathing practices, we also have some areas to look at. Of course, the first one is the intention of bringing a certain breathing practice into the session. And then there's the depth of the breath and the pace of the breath and the intensity of the breath, and then which nostril is being emphasized. Because just like the body is associated with one branch of the autonomic nervous system, the nostrils are also. The left nostril is associated with parasympathetic dominance, and the right nostril is associated with sympathetic dominance. And that's the basis for a whole school of yoga, branch of yoga called Swara Yoga, SWARA, which offers techniques for ensuring that the nostril is dominant, which matches the activity that you're about to do. So I'm not going to go into that now, but again, it's in my writing. What we're going to do is practice the yogic 3-part deep breath, which is the basic breath that underlies most of the other ones. So we can start now by just noticing the natural flow of the breath, watching it as you inhale and exhale. And there are benefits to just watching the flow, which is easier for some people than the breathing exercises, because they don't have to, there's no performance anxiety around it. You're just watching what naturally happens. But for other people, just being with the breath can raise the anxiety level. So they probably would do better with a specific breathing practice which is taught, which gives their mind more focus. So all of these interventions are so individual. It always makes sense to me to work with people individually who are dealing with nervous system dysregulation, although you can work with people in a group. I describe more about that in my writing. So we're going to do the simple yogic 3-part deep breath, which you may have done 100 or 1,000 times, but it's always valuable to bring one's focus onto the breath, the breathing pattern. I think it's valuable to have a teacher also to facilitate the greatest regulation, because I'm someone, hopefully, who will be a calming influence on your nervous system. I'll be providing safety to your nervous system. That is the role of the therapist, in my opinion, no matter what kind of therapist. It's also a role of a medical provider, of a teacher, a police officer, of a fireman or woman. And these are all areas where polyvagal theory can be applied. Okay, so please exhale. And on your inhalation inhalation, with the spine as straight as you can make it in a way that's comfortable for you and your head in line with the spine, inhaling into the abdomen only, filling the abdomen like a balloon. Do that on your own 2 or 3 times. You can place your hand on your abdomen to feel the movement. of the way. Good. And after your next exhalation, when you inhale, you can bring your hands to your rib cage, feeling the ribs expanding out to the side. So you're inhaling, feeling the expansion. Exhaling, ribs and abdomen in that order. Doing that on your own a few times. And now you can move your awareness up to your chest. We're going to be doing the third part of the 3-part deep breath. Breathing into the chest, feeling the collarbones rise. So you can inhale, abdomen, rib cage, and chest with your hands on your chest. Feeling the movement. And then exhale, chest, ribs, and abdomen in the opposite order of the inhalation. Try that on your own a couple of times. And after your next exhalation, you can let the breath return to normal. Bring your hands back to your lap. And watch the breath again. So notice if you feel any differently now than you did before you started the breathing practices or the postures. Remembering that the variables that you have available to help your clients or patients are the pattern of the breathing practice, the rate, the depth, the effort, and the nostril. So we can move on briefly to the first part of the yoga nidra, the yogic sleep exercise, which you could either put into the category of relaxation, or you can put into the traditional category in Raja Yoga of sense withdrawal. What that means is that in order to meditate and go into higher states of consciousness in the yogic system, this Raja Yoga system, individuals practice withdrawing their awareness or their focus on their senses and start to focus more on their internal world. Because there's a more of a subtle fine-tuning available if someone is in very intimate contact with their internal world, their sensations, and their breathing pattern. These are the physiological cues that the primitive brain responds to the most strongly. I can't remember if I mentioned it, but the primitive brain has instinctual patterns that we're born with to keep us alive. And some which are set in after we're born. And this part of the brain that safeguards our survival is not going to give up those patterns very easily. So if there are some harmful patterns, it's going to be difficult to change them, but not impossible through yoga. And some of the most powerful ways to influence this primitive brain are through being aware of our internal experience, being aware of our body sensations, and creating optimal breathing patterns. And this is because when we're aware of our sensations and aware of our breath, we are moving our awareness into the present moment. And when we're present, our autonomic nervous system automatically starts to regulate itself. And that works two ways. We can start with a regulated nervous system and have that set the tone for our breathing pattern, or we can start with the breathing pattern and then have that influence our autonomic nervous state. And you can see which one of those is more easily done. So there are two other breathing practices which I think are very powerful for this kind of work, or let's say two which I've chosen to present in this work. There are other practices which other therapists may feel even more comfortable with and may want to bring into the work. But these are alternate nostril breathing and Brahmari, the bee breath. I don't think we're going to do them today, but I'd like to just mention that alternate nostril breathing is the 3-part deep breath done through one nostril and then the other, and repeating that pattern over and over again. And this is powerful because, as I mentioned, each nostril is connected to a different aspect of the autonomic nervous system on the gross physical level and to our subtle nervous system on the energetic level, which is closely associated with our physical nervous system. So some of you may or may not be interested in looking into the more subtle aspects of the breathing practices. So as far as the deep relaxation goes, Yoga Nidra, I'd like to present only the first part of a 4-part trauma-sensitive Yoga Nidra that I've developed, which evolved from my experience with the integral yoga form of Yoga Nidra taught by Swami Satchidananda and adapted from his teacher, Swami Shivananda. So I'm going to just describe it. I'm not going to actually do it because of time constraints, but it is a very good place to end this presentation because I have realized that every instruction in the first part of the 4-part Yoga Nidra deep relaxation, which is actually called progressive deep relaxation, every instruction targets one of the focuses of the vagus nerve, the ventral vagus nerve. We're instructed to sequentially relax our muscles, relax the breath, and then relax the throat, the jaw, the cheeks, lips, teeth, and even the tongue. And all of those organs are connected to the cranial nerves and influence the autonomic nervous system. Then tense and relax the nostrils, the eyes, the forehead and scalp. And these also are very connected through the cranial nerves to our autonomic nervous system. So as a preparation for a deeper relaxation, we will have contacted and relaxed every connection between, every willful connection, every connection that we have some control over between our body and our autonomic nervous system. And that, again, to me, is either an extraordinary coincidence or the result of a system that knew exactly what it was doing in balancing and regulating the autonomic nervous system to give a person a lot of strength and solidity and sensitivity as a preparation for higher states of consciousness and the transformation of the energy system that I know of as yoga. Thank you so much. You're welcome to visit my website, www.yogainpsychotherapy.com. So I created that name before I focused my work on yoga therapy. And so that's why I'm calling it psychotherapy. My email address is my name, Joann Lutz 22@gmail.com. That's JOANNLUTZ 22@gmail.com. And I have an e-newsletter, which I would love to add your email address to. So if you send me your email address with a little note requesting to be added to my newsletter list, I'd be happy to do that. And then you will receive regular information about what I'm doing. I do offer online trainings, both through myself and through PESI, PESI, which is a continuing education training organization. And I will be offering one of my own courses online beginning in October, East Coast time, and in February, Mountain time. So I welcome you to get in touch with me. I would really enjoy connecting, which is regulating for the autonomic nervous system. And I hope that if you're interested in what I'm doing, you might want to purchase my book. A good way to do that is through Handspring Publishing, which is the publisher of the book, or it's also available on Amazon and other bookseller sites. So thank you so much. Wishing you the best in your life and your work.